Hello everyone, welcome to today's lecture. So we are now starting with chapter number 5. The last chapter was about the market forces of supply and demand. So we got an introduction about what is supply and what's demand and how a market actually works. And this semester this chapter we will go a little bit more deeper into the topic of demand and supply and learn about elasticity and its application. So this chapter is really much connected with the last chapter, and it talks about demand and supply, but we are taking one more step towards understanding these two concepts in a better way, and I will explain how that links to it. And then I will briefly introduce what is elasticity, and I will give an example of all oil prices, how elasticity actually affects oil prices as an example. And then there are three main topics in this chapter. The first topic is about the elasticity of demand. So we will spend much more of this video talking about the elasticity of demand. And then the second topic is about the elasticity of supply. So supply and demand, they are contrary to each other. So whatever we learned in demand, similar concept is also applicable to the supply. So that's why we will not spend much time on the second topic, which is about the elasticity of supply. But still, we will introduce a few more important points there, which is specific to the supply side of the market. And at the last, there are three applications of elasticity given the real world examples. So we will see basically how the concept of elasticity works in actual world. So how, for example, it affects OPEC, drug addiction, and control of drugs, and also an example is regarding agriculture. So this topic is a bit counterintuitive, to be honest, about elasticity, and sometimes it's not easy to understand it at the first instance, but through time you will get used to the concept itself. And then when we say, for example, what is the price elasticity and other thing, with the time you will be able to grasp these ideas more easily. So if you have if you have a little bit trouble understanding elasticity at the first time, that's completely fine. But with the time, as this concept will repeat in the coming chapter, and also we will talk about this chapter, you will have the opportunity to understand this more. Okay, so let's get started. So at the introduction of this chapter, the book gives the example of oil prices, and that's a very common topic which most of us face with it. So what happens is, for example, that suddenly, I don't know, because of any calamities or because of different policies in the oil producing country, the price of oil suddenly changes. So drastically, you wake up the next morning, it says like, I don't know, a tanker was being bombed in Middle East or somewhere, and then the prices of oil changes suddenly. So you see like there is a sudden increase in the price of oil, which most people use it, for example, in their cars for traveling to work or any other business. So this change in oil prices basically can better explain the concept of elasticity. So what happens is, like, if there is a shortage of the supply of oil, there will be a sudden increase in the prices of oil. But because the elasticity of prices for oil is inelastic, people will still buy oil for their cars or for general use. But that only affects the short term, but in the long term, people probably, if the prices of oil remain very high for a long time, say 1 year or 2 year, so that the elasticity of oil will be more elastic if we think in a long term. So giving the long term perspective, people might change from using oil to more alternative sources such as using electric cars or using rail or public transport. So as just an example that I wanted to share at the beginning, we will come back to this example later on. And the oil prices basically is an easy way to explain the elasticity of the prices and how that affects the demand and supply. Okay, so the next important point is that in the law of demand, which we discussed in the last chapter, we say that when the prices increases of a certain product, then the quantity demand will decrease. So that's basically the law of demand. So when prices are high, people will buy less. What we will learn in this chapter, we will learn, okay, the people will buy less, but we will measure it actually how much less. So we will have a quantitative measure and the change of the quantity based on the change in price. So I will repeat myself. So the law of demand and supply, or take the example of only the law of demand, says that when prices are high, people will buy less. But we don't know how much less. 1 liter less oil, 2 liter less oil, or how much. But with the concept of elasticity, we will be able to measure this by quantity. So we will say, okay, if the price of oil increases by $1, people will buy 2 liter less of oil. So we will come up with this idea of quantitative measure. So we exactly know the effect of change in the price on the quantity demanded. So that's basically the main concept of elasticity. So you see how much change in price will affect how much of the quantity demanded or supplied. So I will read one definition of elasticity to you from the book. It says like elasticity is a measure of how much buyers and sellers respond to changes in the market condition. So it's basically a measure, it's a relative term. We will come up how to calculate it later on. So it's a measure and then shows exactly how much buyers and sellers respond to any change in the market. So as I said, the market for oils, there is a sudden increase in the price of oil. So you will see how buyers, who are the consumers, and sellers, who are like the pump station and the gas station, they will react and respond to this change in the prices of oil or this change in the market condition. So that's basically the concept of elasticity. I will briefly say it again. So elasticity is a measure which shows how much change in price or how much change in one variable will affect the change in another variable. So that was the general definition of elasticity. And then we will come to price elasticity of demand and other topics later on. So that was the introduction part. And we will start with the first main topic, which is the elasticity of demand. Okay, so we will only talk about demand in this part. In the next section, we will talk about the supply. But most of the concepts which we will learn here will be the same. Okay, so what is the elasticity of demand? It's basically the quantitative measure of change in the quantity demanded based on the price. So it's some quantitative measure, as I said, and basically it says how much change will be there in the demand given a certain change in the supply in the price of a product. Okay, the first topic under this section is the price elasticity of demand and its determinants. So now we are talking about the price elasticity. So before I just introduced the concept of elasticity, but now we talk about the price elasticity for demand. Okay, I will break down this title so you understand it more easily. So the title is the price elasticity of demand. So first we are talking about the change in the price, so that's the price part. And then elasticity, we see how flexible is price in regard to the demand. So first part is the price, and then we see the elasticity of the price of demand. That means how that will affect the demand part of it. Okay, the price elasticity of demand measures how much the quantity demanded responds to change in the price. Again, I will emphasize that the whole concept of elasticity is on how much. So we are talking about the measure. And this concept of the price elasticity of demand says how much change in the price will bring change in the quantity demanded. Okay, there are three terms which will make this definition much more easier. First one is called elastic. So elastic demand, it's a situation if quantity demanded responds substantially to change in price. So that one is called elastic. So an elastic demand is if the quantity demanded responds substantially to change in price. So if there is a change in price and quantity demanded has either decreased substantially, that means that this demand is elastic. If it's the other way around, it's called inelastic. So what is inelastic demand? Inelastic demand is if the quantity demanded responds only slightly to change in the prices. So if there is a change in the price but the quantity demanded didn't change that much or very little, that will be called inelastic demand. And then there is a third term which is called unitary elastic, is that when the change both in the price and change in the quantity is the same. So if there is 1% change in the price, there is a 1% change in the quantity. So that will be the unitary elastic demand. So these are the three terms that we can say, okay, this demand is elastic, this is inelastic, this is unitary elastic, and these concepts basically explain how much change and demand will happen as a result of change in the price. Okay, the second part of this title was is about the determinants. So what determines the price elasticity of demand? So for example, if we consider the market for oil, what factors basically affects if the demand will be elastic or inelastic or unitary elastic? So there are some factors that we will go through and I will briefly explain them, and that will also help you understand more what basically price elasticity is, and then you can also be able to yourself to say, okay, probably this good or this service is elastic, this is inelastic, and you will be able to understand the elastic term in a very easy way. Okay, so the first determinant is the availability of close substitute. So we have already talked about substitute goods or goods which are similar. So if there is a close substitute to one good, so if you can easily switch from one good to another good, um, the demand for this type of goods are elastic. I will repeat myself. So if you have close substitute for one product, then the demand for that product is elastic. Why? Because say ice cream and iced yogurt are very close substitute to each other. So if the price of ice cream will increase, people will shift to the iced yogurt or similar product which is a substitute for ice cream. So what happens is that when you have a close substitute, a small change in price will have a substantial effect on the demand of that product. The second determinant is necessities versus luxuries. So you will see if whether a product is a luxury or necessity, and that will determine if the demand for that good or service is elastic or inelastic. So as a basic example, I can give you the example of food. So food is something inelastic. So because it's a necessity, so we need food for survival. And even if the price of food increases €1 or €2, nobody will stop eating. So we still need to eat food. So that's why the demand for necessities are inelastic. So even if there is a change in the price, the quantity demanded will go down very slightly. So there will be a little bit change in the quantity demanded. Why? Because we don't have any other option. For example, we don't have any alternative to food. So that's why we will still consume food. But for luxury goods, it's the other way around. So if the prices of luxury goods changes a little bit, there will be a huge decrease in demand for that good. Why? Because we really don't have to have a luxury uh, lifestyle because it has become expensive. I would say think like about the holidays and vacations. If you see like if there is a sudden increase in the price of flight tickets, then probably you will think, okay, I don't have to go to a vacation or I don't have to go to a vacation now. Probably I can delay it for later. So your your demand for luxurious products are elastic. So you as a change in price will result in a huge decrease in demand for that product. That the third determinant is called definition of the market, and it basically says how do you define the market. So if you define a market in a very strict way, uh, that will be more elastic for one product. If you explain that in a very broad term, that will be inelastic. Uh, we will come back, for example, for the food. I just give the example that we need food anyway, so it's inelastic. But if you go and if you define the food market very specifically, you come to a specific, for example, type of milk. And then if you narrow down the definition of market only to milk, then the demand will be more elastic. What does that mean? For example, there are several types of milk in the market, type A, B, C. And if the price of milk A increases, then you will just switch to type B because both of them are milk. So the demand for milk, given that we define the market very strictly, is elastic. But if we talk if we define the market for food very in a broader term, for example, only the food, that will be inelastic because there is no other close substitute for that. Okay, the last determinant of the price elasticity of demand is time horizon. So it shows if we are talking about the short run or long run. For example, um, if the change in the prices of oil, we are just talking about okay, what will happen in 1 week or 2 weeks, as compared to 1 year or 2 year. So if we are defining for a shorter period of time, um, that will be inelastic, especially for example, consider oil. So if there is an increase in the price of oil, for example, today, tomorrow, your demand for the oil is inelastic because tomorrow you have to go to work and you have to use your car. So you will buy oil anyway. It will be the same for the coming 1 or 2 weeks or even months. So if we define it in a short term, probably for some goods it's elastic now, but later it's inelastic, or the other way around. So as I said, if we take the example of oil and the short run within 1 week or 1 month, it is inelastic. Why? Because we cannot just switch from car to just use another method of transportation in the short run. But in the long run, it's very elastic. So what happens is that people say, okay, using car is very expensive now because the price of oil has increased. So probably I should use public transport, or probably I should use other ways of transportation or methods of transportation. So this time horizon also affects if the demand for a product is elastic or inelastic. So these were some of the determinants of price elasticity of demand. I will name them again quickly. So first we said availability of close substitute, second necessities versus luxury, and third definition of the market, and fourth time horizon. Okay, now we will go to the next topic, which is about computing the price elasticity of demand. So how we can actually calculate this demand elasticity, the price elasticity of demand. The formula is given in the book, and there are two methods mentioned. So the first one is just you calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in the price. So you see how much quantity has changed, and then you divide that by how much price has changed. And then you will get a figure, and that's the figure for elasticity. Note that mostly because this end result is we mostly see the absolute value of that figure, so we are not very concerned about the minus or plus sign of that figure. Why? Because we already knew that there is a negative relationship between quantity demanded and the price. So if you calculate by this method, you will get a positive figure, but you already knew that there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So the general rule is to have this absolute value regardless of the sign you calculate the elasticity figure. So that was like the very basic straightforward point. And basically this formula which I have just mentioned, it's also called like the point elasticity of demand. So you only calculate the elasticity of demand in one point along the demand curve. We will come back to this one later. And I will mention the second method of calculating the price elasticity of demand. The second method is called the midpoint method. This method is a little bit better as compared to the first one, and it's also widely used. Why? Because it, it's more stable, or you have a more better understanding of the demand between 2 points. So before we were just calculating for 1 point, but using the midpoint method, we are calculating the elasticity between two different points, and then it's also based on the average, so it gives us a very concrete result. The formula is written in the book. I will briefly read the formula and I will explain what the terms mean, and then you will understand it much more better. So the midpoint method equals to above, and the denominator is quantity 1 minus quantity 2. So you basically see the difference between the second quantity and the first quantity, and then you divide that by the summation of both quantities. So you find the average of these two quantities, and then you divide the difference by the average. So that's on the numerator for the quantity of the product. And denominator, we do the same thing for the price. So we find the differences of the price, which is P2 minus P1. So how much the price has changed from the second to the first. And then we divided that by the average price. What is the average price? It's the price of P1 and P2 divided by 2. So this midpoint method is also another way of measuring the elasticity. Okay, so that was the measurement of the price elasticity of demand. And basically, when we get a figure at the end of this calculation, so it will be 1 or above 1 or below 1. And using this term, this quantity, we can actually determine if the demand for that product is elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic. So if this elasticity figure is greater than 1, we call this demand as elastic. If this is less than 1, so we call it inelastic. And if it is 1, so it's called unitary elastic. And that's, as I said before, it's like 1% change in the price will bring 1% change in the quantity. So that will be unitary elastic or unit elastic. Okay, so we have said, so we have talked about how to calculate elasticity of demand, and we also said what the results will mean. And there are different figures. If you check in the book, figure 1, so you will see different types of elasticities, and then you can also see their graph, and you see how much change in one of them, one price actually affects the quantity. So you will be able to recognize which demand is elastic, which one is inelastic, and which one is unitary elastic in figure 1 of the book. Okay, we will move to the next topic, and that is the total revenue and the price elasticity of demand. So now that we have understand elasticity, we will take it to another step and say why it is important to understand this. One of the main reasons is that this elasticity for demand actually affects your total revenue. Okay, so what is total revenue? It's price multiplied by the quantity sold. So it's P multiplied by Q. P is the price and Q is the quantity. So this shows how does total revenue changes as one moves along the demand curve. So you see if the demand is more elastic, what will happen to the total revenue? If it's less elastic, what will happen to the total revenue? And for more understanding of it, you can see the figure 2 in the book, and you see like the total revenue. So you multiply the price of that product to the quantity of that, and then you get the total revenue. And then you see, okay, what will happen if price changes and then the demand is inelastic? Or what will happen if price increases and then the demand is elastic? What will happen to the total revenue? Will your total revenue increase or decrease? What will happen to that? So the general rule is that when there is inelastic demand, say for example for food, the demand is inelastic because even if the price of food goes up, you will still buy it. So if the demand is inelastic, when the price increases, total revenue will also increase. Why? Because you have increased the price, so now you're selling your product, for example, with a higher price, and uh, people are still buying it because there is no other way of not buying food. So probably there is a little bit, they are buying a little bit less because it's expensive now, but still they are buying. So this decrease in quantity is much more smaller than the increase in the price. So that's why your total revenue will still increase. Okay, I will say it again. So if the demand is inelastic, an increase in price will also increase the total revenue. Why? Because people, they will still buy your product, but now you're selling it with a higher prices, so definitely you will have more income or more revenue. But in the second case, if the demand is elastic, an increase in price will actually reduce your total revenue. Why? Because you have increased the price, but people are no longer buying